We have signal. Signal confirmed. Verifying. Decrypting. It's the History Homos podcast. Scott, William, and Patrick cutting through all the slop and trash. Informational snow crash. Go back. Go back. MK Ultra, go in.
And we're live. Hello, History Homos listeners. We're bringing you not a white pill, but a black pill antidote today with probably another one of the best British commentators, Mr. Frank Wright from Substack.
Welcome to the show, Frank.
Oh, hello, chaps. Hello. Yes.
So William, how did you? I Substack, an esteemed fellow Substacker, first of all, but yeah. William was the first person to put you across my desk, Frank. But when I checked out your stuff, I was very encouraged, especially because the first article I saw by you was one talking about the Jordan Peterson's Edge conference, basically in the UK.
Yes, regrettably, I was admitted into his conference on a press pass, which I thought was astonishing because in previous months, obviously, I mean, who hasn't been blocked by Jordan Peterson?
Right. But even Elmo.
Yes, Elmo, indeed. Elmo didn't do very well, did he? Oh, no.
No.
I think Elmo got wrecked by the invincible intellectual prowess of the leading conservative intellectual of our times. So Jordan Peterson, of course, is a seething nutcase, and it was the fact that I referred to this that triggered him, to be honest, because he was talking about some kind of nonsense in his usual idiom, and I asked him, is there anyone in this kind of online coterie of the so-called right that isn't a seething nutcase? And he blocked me for this because, of course, I quoted his posts that said, give him hell, Netanyahu, a position he has not resiled because obviously he's a close personal friend of the architect of the genocide in Gaza. So,
but alleged employee of?
Oh, well, I don't think there's much alleged about it. Look, really, to put one thing straight, I tend not to entertain people much who go on about the Jews because it isn't the Jews. It's a very specific group of Jews who are behind people like Jordan Peterson, who sponsor directly people like Douglas Murray. Douglas Murray, in case you don't know, is sponsored by a Jerusalem-based Hasbara organization called NGO Monitor.
Yeah.
Its sole purpose is to disparage and undermine any source that is critical of Israel's extreme Jewish supremacist Zionist policies. Now, again, if you're going to go on about it being the Jews, you really ought to have a look at what's going on in Israel, because even people like Avigdor Lieberman, who was certainly not a liberal and wanted to basically exterminate everybody at one point who wasn't Jewish, even he criticizes these nutters in Netanyahu's cabinet. So does, of course, Yair Lapid, who said that any impartial news was basically anti-Israel in the World News Network, as it were, in the coverage of Israel. So people who aren't liberals even think that these people are nutters. And it's these nutters with which people like Peterson and Niall Ferguson and Douglas Murray are partnered.
Tommy Robinson.
Well, yes, they're partnered with a very extreme faction. Tommy Robinson, I think, in one of his first televised interviews, was pictured wearing an enormous badge saying, "I'm a Zionist."
Yeah.
And you can easily find this if you look for it. So, you know,
I've seen one of him in an IDF T-shirt.
Yes,
Right.
this is what you call the counter-jihad movement, which is basically an attempt to hijack, outrage.
Nativist sympathies.
It's an attempt to hijack outrage about the mass migration into the West, which is an economic policy of the liberals, by the way.
Yeah.
It's deliberate. They want to destroy our civilization. This is one method they use to do it. It's an attempt to hijack that and funnel it into anti-Islam rhetoric, which basically supports the Israeli position of the extremists in power.
And I think I do agree with you on that take about it's not the Jew. The thing with the Jews is that they are adaptable, and they will thrive in whatever the current conditions or political or whatever conditions are. And like we've done a few episodes on the big Jewish bankers of New York in particular, and like,
Europe as well.
Yeah, and Europe, yeah, and how they're like, they weren't Zionist for the most part, but you know,
until they were,
yeah, and then and I think they're just as capable of not being Zionist again. They don't care about that shit.
There's two things that I'd say about that. Is that one, there is the question of tribalism, which is entirely natural. It's entirely natural that people act as a tribe and act in the interests of their tribe and so on. And the fact that this recognition of reality is prohibited under the liberal consensus shows you how it has to exclude the basic facts of reality in order to maintain its liberal consensus. That's to say, maintain the cordon sanitaire in Europe, for example, against popular policies, as well as in Britain, of course.
Yeah.
So the fact that the Jews act tribally is basically the same as any other tribe that isn't restricted by law from doing so. Every tribe seeks the advantage of its
Indians,
own.
very notably in America, particularly.
Often to the disprivilege of other tribes. It's normal to want to secure the future of your tribe, its territory, its traditions, its culture, and this will lead to some form of conflict. And a realistic policy of diplomacy, if you like, is one that is based on the recognition of this basic fact about reality. We can never solve our conflicts if we fail to recognize this. In fact, if we prohibit it, it's insane, and it will lead to conflict, and it will lead to hatred. It won't suppress it. It will generate hatred. Because simply put, politics should be in some way about balancing the interests of competing tribes. And now, the odd thing to say about all this is the only tribe that people like me are permitted to belong to is the liberal tribe.
Yeah.
Our actual tribes are to be abolished in the pursuit of a global monoculture. And so that's why our tribes are prohibited from mention, and you can't ask to defend them or its culture or traditions or religion or anything like that, because it's marked for abolition. And that's basically it. That's not just the work of the Jews as well. That's the liberals. That's a liberal idea. It's been a liberal idea for a century. And so, and finally, the other thing to say about it is that power doesn't work like that. Power's not unitary. It's always factional. And it is a mistake to speak of the Jews in this sense. There are at least, 4 ethnic Jewish groups. The liberal Jews in the diaspora in the United States now overwhelmingly do not support Netanyahu. They're rather opposed to the Israeli government. There are non-Zionist Jews. I was astonished to meet them in person myself when I first encountered them in North London, in Golders Green. I met some OJs.
I've seen them walking around, yeah.
We don't believe in the state of Israel. I said, what do you mean? He said, well, Israel should be founded by God, not by man. It's basically irreligious. And of course, the state of Israel were founded by people like David Ben-Gurion, who themselves were terrorists, but secular Zionists.
Socialists, too.
Yes, they were socialist seculars, and they have absolutely nothing to do with any religious claims. And so when you look at that, it's very easy to get into this common illusion because language allows you to see people as a unitary faction, but they aren't. Power is factional; it's always factional, and it's a fantasy to imagine that any tribe really acts with that kind of unity, because there's a really quite distinct variety in it. And I think also we should pay attention to some of the more sane Jewish voices themselves, who warn of the devastating backlash that awaits all the Jews if the Israelis succeed in aligning all Jews with the defense of the policies and practices of Israel. This is going to cause anti-Semitism, say many leading Jews themselves from within Israel and from the United States diaspora. It's extremely dangerous, and to be honest, a lot of them don't deserve it. You know, people like Kit Clarenberg, Seymour Hersh, the late Daniel Ellsberg. There's a long list of critics of the liberal death machine who are Jewish and who have done, like Mike Benz, for example, today. Mike Benz is one of the best fellows working to expose what you would call the deep state. He's excellent at it. Stephen Miller, who works for Donald Trump, who's basically one of his right-hand men, has been variously described as some kind of Nazi. So not everybody supports. Not everybody supports Stephen Greenblatt. Jonathan Greenblatt and his outrageous.
You mean Nosferatu, the star of the hit film?
Are you aware that Greenblatt addressed the Knesset in January, basically begging the IDF to mount a worldwide pager campaign to detonate the telephones of anyone he deems an anti-Semite in the West, across America and Australia, New Zealand, Canada?
Seems about part and parcel.
Yeah. He did say that. He said, we call for the ingenuity of those attacks to be used in a new unit, possibly from 8200, the intelligence unit in the RDF, to combat global anti-Semitism, this mission he says he wants them to undertake. So Jonathan Greenblatt...
I mean, that'll work an absolute treat. That's a way to stop people being anti-Semitic.
He wants to blow your hands off. He wants to blow your genitals off, blow your face off, and that will teach you for, basically being... If you look at the directions given to the British Parliament, because of course there is an organisation called Anti-Semitism Limited, it's a business, which presents its evidence, as it were, to British parliamentarians, current and prospective. And the latest round of advice on anti-Semitism includes criticism of COVID-19 vaccines and lockdowns, criticism of net zero, criticism of the Ukraine war. So basically anything that's critical of the liberal global agenda, liberal consensus, is now deemed anti-Semitic and can be pursued for that reason. So that's the advice upon which the British government is proceeding when it talks about combating anti-Semitism. Basically, it's just cracking down on anti-regime speech.
Right. Frank, I don't know if you knew this, but the FBI, which is American listeners will recognize as being the secret police of the United States, as part of training to become an FBI agent, it requires you to go to the Holocaust Museum. And in 2019, so by the way, that's when Trump was president. So it's not like a policy. It's not like a administrational sort of policy. Chris Wray, who was the FBI director at the time, said in an address to the ADL, said the FBI and the ADL are the same organization.
Well, that's astonishing, but I wouldn't say that it's that much. I mean, I've heard that there's quite a lot of Mormons there, for example. But the thing is that if you look at the interdigitation of the Israeli lobby and the United States, it's not one that's it's been a relationship that's operated largely without restraint for at least 5 decades since the nuclear blackmail of the 1973 war. So we've seen things like previous to that, the Liberty incident and so on. But the thing is that what you're talking about is a policy without limits. Now, Israeli power without limits has nearly destroyed Israel right now. Today, it is strategically defeated. Its army is overstretched. Its economy is in a death spiral. Its judiciary has been corrupted. Its government no longer functions. Its police force doesn't catch criminals. It doesn't work anymore. So an Israel without restraint has destroyed itself. It's like a train with no brakes. And so this has also been characteristic of the United States' pursuit of a liberal global empire. That complete lack of restraint, the unrestrained fantasy of total domination, which is
Fukuyama,
Well, no, not Fukuyama. He's an idiot. The
idea, he's been proven wrong by history.
Well, of course, he was proven wrong years ago. But what's proven the United States wrong is the hard limits of reality, not the contradiction of a man's book published in 1993. It's the hard limits of reality, which is basically the United States was going to go bankrupt if it didn't retire from its global ambitions. And also, the hard limits of power have been reached in the fact that it is no longer the single world's hyperpower, that there are competing powers. It doesn't control the majority of the world's resources, for example. And this is a fact that can't be changed by propaganda. And the damage done to Israel by its lack of restraint also can't be reversed by propaganda. And nor can the damage done to its international reputation by its 15 months, I think 16 months now, of almost unrestrained slaughter and mass starvation. So these things are the result of, if you like, an absolute victory in terms of it being completely without limits. But the end product has not been a triumph. It's been self-defeating. The United States is now retreating from all this. And I think that that kind of Israel is incompatible with the national security strategy of the United States in future.
Yeah. I made a meme, probably getting on for a year ago now, which was, the Drake meme, which is the stroke.
Yeah, of course.
But, yeah.
Classic.
And it was broken windows, bombing hospitals.
Yeah. I will say this is that there's been a lot of, obviously this is like one of my main concerns is like the foreign policy of the United States. And I am a little less optimistic about it. I know they hate that word, I do too, but I'm a little more pessimistic, I would say. Actually, there we go. That's a nice way to put it. I'm a little more pessimistic about the near future. I definitely see the NATO flirting with leaving NATO, and particularly the peace talks that are going on in Ukraine are very encouraging, and I think is definitely a right step for America. But I can't help but see that as like just a reshuffling of deck chairs on the Titanic in order to prepare for the next iceberg, which is going to emphasis on berg in the Middle East. But
they are trying to right the ship, aren't they? They're kind of trying to save this liberal project to whatever extent they can.
I don't agree at all. I don't agree with any of that. The United States can't afford a war. If you did have a war in Iran, look, basically all of this stuff is downstream of money. In one sense, it does have moral and encouraging side effects. The dismantling of the global influence network, for example, through US aid and so on.
Yeah.
Basically, what's happening?
Well, it's funded now. I don't know if you knew that. It's funded. It's going forward. It's going to be funded by. They just did that spending bill in Congress, and it's about to pass Senate. That and Chuck Schumer, by the way, crossed party lines to sign it. But USAID is fully funded for this foreseeable future. And the only person who voted against it in the Republicans was Thomas Massie. And that morning, Trump took to Twitter to say, "Get Massie out of office."
Look, the system is being dismantled. This is what's happening right now. The international system went from overnight from being a ambitious and laudable attempt to secure global domination for the United States through the global exporter liberal model. Overnight, it became corruption. And that corruption scandal continues to unfold. This is the narrative that's coming out of the Trump administration now. Because basically, this is a result of what's called the Lippmann gap, which is where your foreign policy commitments far exceed your capabilities. So that means you've got too much to pay for, ultimately. And also, your so-called security guarantees don't mean anything because you can't really win a war. You can't win a war with Russia. There's
certainly not Russia.
Russia would trounce NATO. NATO's pivotal. It isn't easy. But and again, in the Middle East, if you did have a war with Iran, the global economy would collapse. And the United States doesn't have an autarkic global economy. It's too interdigitated with it. It would be absolutely catastrophic in ways that it wouldn't be for other nations, because it doesn't have the vast industrial base of China. It doesn't have the limitless mineral resources of Russia, for example. And these two nations would cooperate very closely, I believe, in that scenario. So that would be a disaster for the United States, in which it probably wouldn't emerge in any recognizable form from that. And I don't think these people are aware of this. So that is the cost of those kind of conflicts, aside from the fact that the United States Global Empire Project was sending it bankrupt, and it didn't work. It didn't topple Russia. You might remember that in the 90s, the economic miracle under Clinton was partly financed by shipping American and European industry off in shipping containers for pennies on the dollar So we could buy back cheap consumer goods from the Chinese after they'd bought and imported our industry. So our heavy industry was dismantled, which destroyed our working class communities, which destroyed our native trades, and basically made our economy one of consumption and not production. Now, what this means is that we in the West actually created the monster in China we now compete against, as it were.
Yeah.
That's why it was one significant reason why the Chinese now have by far the leading industrial power in the world. So they can produce more because we give it to them. Now, I don't know whether you're aware of this.
We didn't
but in the
give it to them.
In the 90s, people believed, and they told us, Bill Clinton said this in the speeches to the Atlantic Council, that when the Chinese develop economically, they will liberalize socially and politically. And now there was no reason given for this, but this was the line that was fought for 10 years. Right. Oh, don't worry. When they get more rich, they'll become more like us. Of course, they haven't. Now, that was the strategy. That was the United States global grand strategy for China. Make them rich and they'll become like us. And then at the same time, tell everybody that Russia's just a petrol station, a gas station with a small army attached. I mean, these are ridiculous ideas. And they're completely unrealistic. They're fantastical. And these are the hard limits that we've met. You've created the conditions for your own defeat. It is a defeat. It's a strategic defeat for the US imperial model. And they're basically winding that back now and selling it to the domestic audience as a win. It is a win because it's sane. It's sane to stop spending money on relentless permanent wars and upon a liberal program that's basically an attempt to destroy Western civilization entirely and replace it with a global monoculture. So that's a win. But in fact, this is all downstream of that urgent necessity to avoid financial collapse. And this is why there won't be any large-scale war, because it would destroy the United States. They're desperate to find a war.
Yeah, I think if there was going to be a war with Iran, it would have already happened.
There's not going to be a war with Iran. They'll open a consul there, and there'll be an embassy there within a few years. There's certainly not going to be a war with Iran. It's ridiculous.
Doesn't have to be with Iran. There's plenty of other areas where we could have a quagmire that would assure the. They did use covert operations in order to overthrow Assad, which was like sort of just nobody noticed because somebody shot a CEO of a healthcare company. Yeah. But overnight, basically, the CIA overthrew Assad's regime after having tried for 30 years, my entire life, essentially. But one comment I had to say about the China thing. You mentioned that speech that Bill Clinton made about they'll get rich and then they'll think like us. No one ever stopped to ask themselves, why do we care about Chinese democracy? Why does that benefit us that on the global stage, China has liberal election, freely selected election?
Well, you're not allowed to ask basic questions about reality. Why does it benefit us to destroy all our industry and replace it with windmills that we have to bury in the earth after their life cycle is ended because they'll never decompose? Why any of these things? Well, it's because, you are trying to create a global monoculture. That's it. And once you've created a global monoculture, you have a true global system, or if you like, a liberal global empire. And there we are. We're all the same. And if you see humanity basically as a management problem to be solved, then this kind of liberal global utopianism makes sense. And some of them truly believe in it. Like people like John Dewey, who has worked with Walter Lippmann to set up the liberal democratic experiment in the 1920s. He wrote a book, a collection of essays called Towards a Common Faith, in which he advanced the ideas of Matthew Arnold, who was about 70 years before him, in the 1850s, saying that you should really promote a religion absent God for popular consumption that everyone can buy into, but it doesn't really have any divine element. So you can retain the armature, the architecture of religion, but none of the divinity of it. And that's what he was talking about. John Dewey, of course, was an educationalist, a reformer in that too. But he was one of the
Dewey Decimal System, right?
Yeah, he was. The library indexing system. He was talking about how to inform the Council on Foreign Relations global management policy for the emerging liberal democratic system that was built after what Wyndham Lewis called the revolution of the First World War, which destroyed the old civilization order in Europe. And then that's where your liberal democratic idea comes from. And from the beginning, it was always founded upon the manufacture of mass belief, upon the idea that the elite should shape public opinion through mass communications, and that public opinion should never shape the direction of political power.
Yeah, right. I agree. Patrick, I'm all about the next step in human evolution. A future where we step outside of the bounds of the human form using technology and spiritual philosophy, right? Well, lately I've been getting impatient as to how long these miraculous technologies are going to come out. So I looked into some, natural alternative. That's when I got clued into a new product by a company that is a great friend of ours, Magic Mind.
Yes, Scott. And I suppose you're referring to their new gummies? That's right. They're basically what you were looking for in your pursuit of uber-human perfection, but without having to upload your consciousness to cloud storage or lose your individuated ego. It's way better. It's all the amazing nootropic ingredients of Magic Mind, but without the caffeine. So you get the same sense of well-being, stress removal, and creative zing that you get from normal Magic Mind, which you and I both love.
Well, yeah, we normally tape the show at 7-ish o'clock at night, and that's too late for me to take a normal shot of Magic Mind, but I still want to commune with the great Lion's Mane biomass network and get my head in the space to break free from the samsara of mortal existence and break on through to embody the Faustian spirit on the other side of the techno-singularity. And let me just, right now, just to show you how much I love them, I'm going to have one right meow. Delicious.
Scott did not bring enough to share, but these things have all of the same organically grown mushrooms and scientifically verified focus boosting ingredients like ashwagandha, but in a delicious gummy that reminds us of green apple fruit leather. And it comes in a convenient Ziploc bag with a 30-day supply inside. And of course, it still carries the 100% money back guarantee. That's how confident Magic Mind is that you will love these things. And don't forget, a portion of every sale goes to help the mentally ill, the primary demographic of this podcast. So you can't afford not to check it out.
Particularly in light of the fact that we have a special introductory offer from our friends at Magic Mind, handcrafted for the more psychonautically inclined members of our audience. 25% off your purchase. So if you're on board, head over to our link at www.magicmind.com/HHGM and use our code HH25, or just follow the link in our description. That's www.magicmind.com/HHGM, code HH25, and try the new gummies today. And don't worry, all that stuff will be in the description of the episode. I am a little worried about that though, because we see people like who are close to Trump, like Elon Musk, and Elon Musk we have the documents people. Just a few weeks ago I had on Johnny Vedmore, Welsh super journalist, by the way, did an amazing write-up, and again I'll just give him a free plug here. His website, newspace.com, he has an article called The Third Culture, where people like Jeff Bezos, Elon Musk, and a bunch of other people, they all went to this these series of talks held by John Brockman. William, you'll remember him from the Das Nets documentary. Right, John Brockman is an Epstein associate, and they were they basically, it's DOD. It's sort of a DOD driven program to sort of shape, as you were just alluding to, like this elites shaping public opinion through social engineering, as it were. And they did this by basically capturing all the social media sites, seemingly Twitter. And the people who run them now are very much literally instructed by these technocrat billionaires who are literally being funded by Jeffrey Epstein, and to sort of shape public opinion into being, and who knows, the beauty of it is it doesn't have to be liberal or conservative. It can be whatever, as long as it's fake.
Oh, no, it's all liberal. I mean, there is no such thing as conservative.
Well, conservatism is liberal.
They're just right liberals. Now, to go back to this, like, this is the technique by which liberal democracy has been managed for 100 years. All that's changed is the technology. It has always been about the direction of the public imagination, the manufacture of mass belief, if you like, in the system, through the use of, first of all, propaganda or advertising. And then after 1948 and George Kennan's paper on the inauguration of organized political warfare, every aspect of Western culture was mobilized in promoting political propaganda for the liberal system. People like Sir Isaiah Berlin, people like Jackson Pollock, people like the leading art critic Clement Greenberg,
CIA, yeah.
Popular news entertainment, popular news articles, news outlets themselves, mass media, entertainment like Netflix, so on. Everything that you see in art galleries and things like that, most of this stuff has been inflected by the sponsorship of culture to promote the idea of liberal global supremacy. And that's
100%.
basically the realization that for 100 years, much of our culture has basically been a message from its sponsors. It's been inauthentic. It is rigged, if you like, and it's there to persuade you of the supremacy of this system and that nothing valid exists outside of it. And so that's the fundamental realization that this is nothing new, that the digital deep state, which is what these people are, is simply a technological update for a technique that's 100 years old. It began in the paper and radio age. Now, as for the digital deep state, people like Larry Ellison and people like Alex Karp and Peter Thiel, all these people got their initial contracts from the CIA, from CIA cutouts or directly from the CIA itself.
Sure.
They invested millions in them. They made them rich. Ellison, for example, got his first contract building a database for the CIA. The reason why these people exist, like Palantir and
Amazon,
Oracle,
even.
Yeah, but the reason, and also Facebook, which is a continuation of DARPA's project LifeLog. The reason all these companies became successful and their owners so rich now is because the CIA sponsored them. So the United States deep state could arm's length the total information awareness program. It could then institute mass surveillance and mass data capture and the algorithmic supervision of its population that would have been prohibited by Congress if the government did it. And it was. They twice tried to get it done. And the TIA was then rebranded as the Terrorism Information Awareness Act. And even that didn't fly. So then that's when Facebook came out. That's when they did in 2003 Palantir, and that's when Oracle started to happen, because the United States deep state began to arm's length its operations. And so basically you ended up with people like Thiel and Karp joking when they were asked, oh, isn't just Palantir a front group for the CIA? And I think it was Peter Thiel who let them joke, no, the CIA is a front group for Palantir, you know. So these people are the digital deep state, and they were created after September the 11th in a response to an extremely dubious terrorist attack that not only unleashed decades of regime change wars which bankrupted the West and killed 1 million historic Christians in Iraq, but also led to the creation of the security state, the national security state, Department of Homeland Security. Michael Chertoff, for example, who was the first DHS secretary, his mother.
You ever gonna look at that guy?
His mother was an Israeli agent. You know, this man awarded some of the biggest contracts to the earliest pioneers of the digital deep state, including Larry Ellison and Alex Karp at Palantir. These people are all involved in this, and they're extremely fishy. And so, yes, there is a danger that this faction, and it is a faction, may seek to supplant the former deep state because, frankly, they already are it. And Palantir is now seeking contracts to do pre-crime profiling of United States citizens in order to identify who might turn out to be a terrorist in the future.
Beautiful. The Carbine 911. Carbine 911 is that company that Nicole Junkerman or something was the John Brockman is a big investor in it. What's his name? Epstein's Lex Wessner, big investor in it. And yeah, you're right. You're absolutely right about the precog crime prevention. They're definitely trying to do that. And also, I would say specifically to Palantir, recently the IDF has been using Palantir's AI software to figure out
Lavender and Daddy. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. So they figured out this, they used AI, I suppose, to do like an algorithmic selection of who the most likely people to become Hamas actors in Gaza. So they can just preemptively go arrest.
Max Blumenthal at the Grey Zone did a really good report on this.
Speaking of one of the good ones, by the way.
Max Blumenthal at the Grey Zone did a report on Palantir's use of Lavender and Daddy to identify terrorists in Gaza, and found the majority of people who were killed as a result of this were, in fact, innocent civilians, women and children. A lot of them were. Now, it's important to know that this is called no-click assassination. So that means that once you start the program, there's no human supervision or intervention. So the AI then profiles people. It looks at all the data that it can find. It assigns targets, and then the AI sends out an AI drone, which then assassinates them.
Yeah.
And there's no one involved in any point of this, simply other than to switch the machine on, as it were. So this is very very disturbing. And also there was a court case where I think it was President Biden in 2021. One of the good things he did actually do some good things, it seemed, was banned Palantir's no-click surveillance software, which was a software so sophisticated that you didn't have to click on any links or open an email or an attachment or an image. It would spy on you through your devices and your computer without your knowledge. And so there was an act passed that banned them from doing that business in the United States or from selling it to any companies that did business in the US. So I think that's been lifted as part of the conditions for the initial ceasefire in Gaza. That was only reported in the Hebrew language news, by the way, which I reported on myself.
Many such cases, yeah. I will say this.
They do have the best media.
True.
They actually do say...
They got a good handle on it.
Well, they dare tell the truth to the Israeli population to a certain extent, I guess. But
it's certainly worth reading the Israeli media. Yeah,
I do. Yeah.
Just backpedaling a little bit to about talking about mass media, which is something I haven't consumed for years because I don't. It does my head in, and it makes me feel. It makes me feel like I'm going to have a breakdown. So I just.
You're some kind of extremist.
Yes.
That's very funny that that guy said that to you.
Yeah.
Why don't you tell that story? Actually, that's one of my favorites.
I told a family member that I don't watch TV because it's all.
And this is a long time ago, mind you.
It makes me feel bad and as if I'm going mental, and it's all lies anyway. And he said, "Oh, you like Donald Trump, don't you?"
Yeah, well, I mean, look, it's a very bold take to label anyone who's doing evil things as Churchill, as Starmer is, and so on, and anyone who's actually doing good in the world, Hitler. That is a very bold take. I mean, have they thought this through?
Well, that Economist cover.
Yes. Is
that real, or did you make that?
It is real. It really is.
No way.
I mean, look. You probably don't know this, but I've written articles that basically, where would we be without Hitler? The Hitler of the Year award.
Yeah.
Bordolf Hitlonson, for example, Nigel Hitlarge, Matteo Hitlini, obviously, Adolf Putin.
Yeah,
of course, Orange Hitler. But like, there's always a Hitler, and there's always, obviously, a Churchill. Now, a couple of years ago, Boris Johnson presented himself as Churchill, of course, because it's Churchillian to risk the fortunes of your own people and destroy your own power. In a futile war. In a futile war you don't have to be involved in, it's basically run by wicked people. And so, of course, he is Churchillian. And then he actually presents the Churchill Award to Zelensky. So Churchill presents Churchill to Churchill. And Churchillizes Zelensky then. So Zelensky becomes Churchillized. And now, of course, Keir Starmer is Churchill too. So there is an interesting recursive attitude or feature in our stuck culture, which says that we can only have certain tropes through which we can see the world. And so it is very odd now that the man who is seeking to prolong a war in which some claim 1.2 million Ukrainians have died for nothing is seen as a national hero. And some say 1.5 million. And also the enormous corruption that I believe will come out following peace. I think that will destroy the reputations of these liberals, which is why they want to keep the war going, because anyone who's invested their political capital in the Ukrainian war is finished when the truth comes out.
Churchill was a key figure in orchestrating World War I, and he was, that how many millions of people did that kill? So it's definitely Churchillian to behave in that way.
Well, look, as I like to say to people who soon to become my former friends, when you give away all your gold, securities, empire, and retreat in disgrace from overseas, you don't usually call that winning.
No.
But we do, of course. And so ever since then, winning has been for losers, right? And losing is for winners.
That's
true. This is where the idea of the moral victory comes from, I think, which has inspired 70 years of the conservative tradition, which is to consistently lose, but then claim a moral victory.
Yeah. Well, I just wanted to say that, yes, I was involved. I was attended for 4.5 hours, a waiting room of a glorious National Health Service facility. And I was forcibly exposed to BBC News 24, I believe the channel is called. It was on 2 televisions in the waiting room at the same time. And I thought, this is why. Number one, this is why. Because all the staff in the hospital are just standing around talking to each other about where they're going on holiday, while everybody's sitting there. All the same people are there all day. It's not busy. There's maybe one person walks in every 35 minutes or something like that, and yet you're there for hours and hours and hours because they're not doing anything. And anyway, BBC News 24 is on, and I've sat somewhere where I couldn't see either of the televisions, which was unfortunately right underneath one of them, so I couldn't avoid hearing
it, yeah.
And the sort of I don't know if it's always like this or if it's just because of this sort of historical moment where the global liberal world order is in some disarray. But the pundits they had on, they were talking about Trump and Ukraine and Russia and Zelensky and all that. But the stuff that the experts were coming out with was so thin. It's just like they're literally, and they like what I famously do on this show all the time. They go all that. Every other word was and I'm like, oh man, this is very unconvincing. But yet, because people
are just doing a sermon.
Yeah, I mean, are they going to lose
sponsored.
people because of this? Yeah.
No, but it's sponsored. I mean, like if you look, for example, at Alex Carr, people are very terrified about Palantir. He's a very unimpressive person. He obviously hasn't got where he is because of his ingenuity.
Yeah.
And if you look at a lot of the people who were involved, I mean, I have met people involved in our foreign service, our intelligence services, senior people, people in NATO, people in the judiciary, people in the civil service, and so on. I've met quite a few of these people, and they're not typically impressive. They're not really. Look, the idea that there is some omnipotent power secretly directing these affairs that can never be defeated is simply not true.
No,
the truth is that you are ruled by corrupt bureaucrats whose system being exposed is going to finish them because it relied on being able to close the loop of information permanently. And if all you could see was that BBC broadcast, then you could never convince people of the reality that it disguised. Now, it's not so much about people like us on podcasts talking about these things. It's reality itself that's making that argument. In the hospital itself, you are surrounded by the decay and chaos and madness that's been the direct result of these liberal globalist policies, to which there has been no alternative. And let's face it, our politics is rigged, and you are not allowed to vote for anyone who isn't a liberal. You can vote for liberals with blue ties, yellow ties, red ties, green ties. You can vote for extreme liberals or moderate ones. But you can't vote for anyone else. You can't have any, and that's what, it's not just an Overton window. This is a cordon sanitaire. And basically, it is the exclusion of reality nowadays, which is why you see these authoritarian measures to criminalize speech and basically suspend democracy. They've cancelled the elections for millions of people in the local elections.
Hungary, right?
No, in Britain, in England.
Oh, people there too,
in England, because they're going to lose them. And that's the same thing that's happened in France and in Germany and in Austria, where the cordon sanitaire operates to exclude the most popular parties from government, because you're not allowed to vote for people who have popular policies, alternatives to the liberal madness. And if you do, they're not allowed to rule, because you're only allowed to pick what we're selling, because everything else is bad. And let's just bring Hitler out again at this point.
Yeah. Well, the other thing,
pile of shoes. Pile of shoes
is very compelling information. Yeah.
While there
was a shoe factory there, by the way. That's why there was a pile of shoes. But there we are.
While the BBC presenters were off having a piss or whatever,
well, they were sorry. I just get this joke in real quick. The reason why the shoes were everywhere is because everyone was swimming in the pool. You don't swim. Go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah. So
look. Just to speak to that, right? If you find yourself scandalized by people making jokes about the pile of shoes, the Norman Finkelstein is very difficult to listen to because of the way he speaks. But he has written a book called The Holocaust Industry, and he himself not only disclaims but absolutely denounces the fact that this has been monetized by a corrupt group of people who have made exaggerated claims in order to enrich themselves and to shield Israel from any legitimate criticism. of its consistently horrific actions over the last 70 years.
Yeah.
So this is not a position that is based upon irrational hatred of the Jews. Saying so is a way to delegitimize, frankly, well-qualified criticism of the way that these historical tropes are weaponized to silence dissent and to promote an ideology that is in no one's interest but in a very small group. Now, the alliance of this kind of Zionist murder cult with the liberal death cult, you can see where they interdigitate quite obviously, because the liberal death cult is a death cult at home with its abortionist and euthanasia policies.
Trans stuff.
Relies on an economic model.
Compulsory vaccinations.
Permanent war. Yes, the novel vaccinations. I mean, you must have seen the meme of Fauci jumping out the window. 100% effective, 90% effective, 50% effective, and then he just waves and runs off the horizon. It's AIDS.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
that's before you get to the dogs and AZT as well, or AZT.
I mean, it was pretty based of him to kill all those gay guys with fake drugs.
Again, a bold take, but I mean, if only you could get him on the podcast and put that to him.
We'll have to. I'll send him an email, see what happens. Yeah.
So while
that
the
was
BBC
a big Fauci ouchie, wasn't it?
Yeah, that was a big ouchie. Yeah, all over their necks. Yeah.
Well,
it's really horrific, I mean, absolutely.
It is sad. It is sad. I actually know. I joke, but I have like family members, not family, interconnected family friend kind of things who are victims of that very drug that killed them. It's very sad. Yeah.
But okay, while the BBC presenters were off, I know, snorting AZT or whatever it is, having their tea break, they ran this like promo thing, which was literally, it was going, disinformation, scary, ooh, that who can you rely on in this world where disinformation is spreading hate and lies and blah, blah, blah. Yeah, our pursuit of truth is relentless. I said, thanks for letting me know, pal.
Was it Big Chin Woman? Was Big Chin Woman there?
I couldn't see it. I only heard it.
For people who don't know, there's a woman with an enormous manly jaw who is our guardian of
that's a dude.
free speech and protects democracy.
Oh, she's called Claire something.
Mariana Spring, I think it is.
Oh, never heard of her.
But anyway, look, she's got an enormous chin. There's a similar venture that's been advertised since May in the European Union called European Democracy Shield. And if you think these claims are overstated, just type that into Twitter or into Google and watch their intro video, and it says, democracy is under threat from disinformation. European Democracy Shield will prevent you from taking these ideas into your head and having thoughts of your own. Yeah. And that's really, look, this is where we are with liberal democracy, right? Now, I didn't get all these ideas myself. I obviously read John Gray for many years, been to see him, spoke to him. He's very brilliant critic of liberalism, was taught by Sir Isaiah Berlin, who was undoubtedly the 20th century's leading champion of the liberal idea. And so he would know more about it than anyone. And he said several years ago that liberalism is finished and that liberal democracy is also finished. The idea has run out of steam. It's contradicted itself. It's made these grand claims. It was basically utopian. It was an attempt to assert fantasy against reality and so on. And that's all very well for, abstract arguments of people who wear nice tweed jackets. But what that means in your real life is that all this culture that you have been seeing replacing your culture was sponsored and is insane. It takes an enormous amount of money and effort to maintain it. And it's not there anymore. So it won't be. The liberal governments are finished. There won't be long before they're gone, all of them. France, Germany, Britain, the lot. It's over.
So I've made some notes for today, which I don't normally do, and that's at the bottom. I've written.
I'm surprised you could read and write, to be honest.
Yeah,
me too.
If you don't watch the BBC, I mean,
it
must be some kind of primitive savage.
It's I thought the title for the episode, Scott, could be "It's so over, and we're so back."
Yeah, well, look, I believe that I believe in these quixotic dreams that jokes will actually return to comedy, and that we'll have some literature worth reading that isn't trash, and maybe some television that isn't just basically a PowerPoint presentation on the wonders of a fantasy Star Trek world. And when you go outside, you get acid thrown in your face by some recent scholarly arrivals.
Yeah.
So obviously, what's gone wrong here is the reality created by the liberal system is so awful that no amount of propaganda, however effective, can countermand it. If things don't work anymore, everything's mad, then it's impossible to ignore. And the worst thing for any politician is that ordinary people get interested in politics because they hate it. Because only weirdos are interested in politics.
Yeah, they suddenly stopped. It was only about probably 15, less than 20 years ago, the discourse was, the political discourse was, social mobility and low voter turnouts are bad. We need to get people involved in politics. Both those things have been switched off like a fucking tap straight away, haven't they? It's unbelievable.
Well, I think it was the IPPR that published a paper a couple of months ago called Half the Votes, and it showed that under half of the eligible voters voted in the last election for Starmer. So about 49%, I think, maybe a hair above that. So that's of the total eligible voting population. So every election result that you see, everything that describes as percentages, is a percentage of 50% of the voters. So voter disengagement is at an all-time low, or at least a century low. And it hasn't been lower in living memory. So there is a complete disaffection with the system. It's none of the above. And I would stress that the recent moves by Nigel Farage have exposed the fact that Reform is a party of continuity and not departure from the Liberal consensus. And there's clear evidence of this.
100%. I mean, I think they're like, haven't they got Tommy Robinson on board now? I only know this from talking to people in the pub. Who are all
no. They disclaim him.
Do they? I thought
Nigel Farage
he's too radioactive.
No, Nigel Farage is basically saying that it's far right to talk about remigration, to talk about actually fixing the problem. Doing anything to fix the problem is far right. We can't do that. But what we can do is do what the Conservatives have always done: is come out with slogans, stirring, vague slogans like "We will save the nation," "We will help you," "We're the only solution," but not actually tell you what they're going to do. Because they won't. And I was speaking to some
they did tell us what they were going to do. They told us they were going to stop the boats. They told us that for 14 years, and they didn't do it.
Well, as you probably figured out, the electoral cycle is like a firework display. It makes wonderful flashes and sparks and bangs, and people go ooh and ah, and then it vanishes into the night to be forgotten forever. And that's what happens in every election. And then they proceed to do exactly the same as the other lot did. Because it's a consensus politics. Nothing really changes. The permanent war on your civilization continues and intensifies, and so on. So you have a situation here where you can obviously note that this is continuity and not departure. It's containment, if you like. But I don't think that cordon sanitaire can hold in Europe or in Britain anymore, simply because the awful reality is so compelling, and it no longer works to call people nasty names, to tell them to put up and shut up with a system they did not want, they didn't vote for, they voted against since 1997.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to just, because we're getting towards the end now, but I just want to say something, because I'll forget by the next time I'm on here. A really good little illustration of just how much less glittering the liberal carrot is than it used to be was in an advert which I heard on a podcast last night, which was for a Morgan Stanley subsidiary called Nutmeg, which is by the way, which is the Morrison's clothing brand. Right?
Very on brand.
Yeah,
for you.
yeah. So, and I thought, Nutmeg. All right, but I thought this is
you need to buy lots of pairs of pants from that brand.
This is a weird advert, right? Because it just goes bing bong, and it's like airport background noise. It goes, everyone who's going on the flight to Auckland needs to go to the boarding gate now. And this woman goes, "Oh, that's us. Come on, kids." And then they're rushing off to the thing, and the voiceover is, we can't give you advice on where to go on your dream holiday, but we can give you advice on how to invest for it. So this is literally what we are saving
aspirational vacationing. Yeah.
Yeah. That's it. that's your
Well, it'll be aspirational potato buying. See,
Yeah,
someday, yeah, butter eating, yeah.
yeah. Well, I mean, do you remember what butter on toast sounds like? If you've seen your neighbours eating buttered toast, then please report them so we have them liquidated, and then you can dine on their children's corpses. You know, but I mean, because basically, you cannot preserve these liberal outposts where against the example of American renewal and the realignment of the global order. It's just impossible because it's like continuing to wave the Soviet flag after the fall of the Berlin Wall. Politics
Pretty
is
nice
now,
looking flag, though.
Yeah.
well, it's politics is now about better or worse. It's that simple. If you continue the decline of continuity, that's worse. It's going to get worse. They're never going to fix it. They're the problem. And so all they can do now is openly reveal the architecture of your Potemkin democracy. Liberal democracy was always rigged. It's now in the open. They simply ban people who have more popular policies, and they imprison you if you complain about the ones that you hate, that you can't change legitimately. It's a system that has no legitimacy. And again, people are so ignorant in the West because despite being supposedly highly educated, practically no one knows that the state has duties. It has a duty to provide security through its monopoly on violence. It has a duty to provide basic prosperity, but it also has a duty to provide meaning. And it does none of these things anymore. So as Gray pointed out several years ago, the liberal state is illegitimate. It doesn't have a right to rule, regardless of its electoral mandate. It is not discharging the duties of the state.
I've been saying that for a while. Like, you know, this guy getting sent to prison for telling a horse to fuck off or whatever it was.
Yelling at a dog, right?
Yelling at a dog. Right. Yeah. Like,
well, he may have hurt the dog's feelings.
Yeah.
You didn't think about that, did you, bigot?
Well, Scott presented that news item to me, and I said, well, I'm not too worried about it because does it really look like the actions of a government that's confident of its own legitimacy if they're doing that?
Not at all.
Well, look, I mean, I'm personally convinced that my dog can speak perfect English, but just refuses to do so in my company. I mean, I can speak Spanish, but I refuse to do so because I think that is the duty of the gentleman.
It's true. I'm really good at pulling wheelies on bicycles, but I refuse to do it.
I
mean, we have proof physical. William, I have to say something about what you were just saying with that ad. The commercial you heard where they're saying
it's crazy, isn't it?
It really is. But this is why I think it's crazy, though, is so they're saying there's disinformation everywhere. I'm like, yeah, it's you. It's you. You're the ones who are making the disinformation. It's amazing because like the contradict something that you were just saying, Frank, that really just resonated with me was this idea that you have this the signal and noise. Basically, the signal is reality. We're all sort of on the same bandwidth at all the times because we're literally all of the same eyes with which to perceive the waves of matter or whatever, right? And noise is this garbage that they pump in literally through artificial speakers into our environment, like the Rat Utopia experiment, William. Yeah. It's just it causes this absolute. This speaks to what you were saying, William. By the way, it causes this absolute like pain in your skull, this like contrast, but between what you're literally seeing with your own two eyes, and reading from potentially unbiased sources, and then also getting just like zapped with fake bullshit on TV. It's and I mean, it's not like this is not like, it shouldn't be surprising to me. Like in the 1980s, Michael Aquino, William, from the Franklin scandal / Program to Kill, he wrote a paper called the Psy-War paper. And basically, he's like, the future of war is not going to be fought with guns. The future of war is going to be fought with information. And basically, the idea is to keep the populace completely confused and bewildered from what is going on at all times. And to do so, introduce a bunch of fake information that is in contrast to their everyday experience. It causes confusion. It causes it makes people more easily susceptible to being ushered into doing different things. I mean, we all remember 2020. That was something that a lot of conflicting information that was going on, and it became very easy to manipulate people into doing exactly what the government wanted them to do. So I think this is like, I think it's great that we're starting to get a little more signal and less noise is basically what
in the 1920s, Walter Lippmann, who was one of the architects of the Liberal Democratic Project through his founding membership of the Council of Foreign Relations, he wrote a book in which he said that power should be administered by the creation of a pseudo-environment in the minds of the public. And what he meant was placing, and he actually said this, pictures in the heads of the man in the street And if you could manipulate them, you could manipulate people's sense of social and interpersonal reality. Now, this leads to the idea of what really is extremism. Isn't it rather extreme to actually actively seek and produce a fake reality in which we all are supposed to act and to mistake for the world, which has turned out to be a mass pathologizing instrument of widespread mental illness, a consumer economy that reduces to basically an addiction economy, where with most people take some form of hormone or mood disruptor, whether legal or otherwise, where your industry is destroyed, with it your trades, everyone's lives become dependent upon meaningless email jobs. There's no dignity to work anymore. There's no dignity in making anything anymore. There's no meaning to life. There's no higher spiritual purpose to life than shopping or fornication or dissipating yourself in some manufactured desire. Isn't that rather extreme? And is it not also rather extreme to say that the economic system demands that you are replaced in your homeland along with all your traditions, cultures, beliefs, religions, and the meaning and value of your life itself in order to make the GDP line go up? Shouldn't that tell us something about the sickness of the economic system itself, rather than the necessity to open the borders to further depress wages and destroy the single income family to make it too expensive for you to have children or own a home in the first place? Isn't that rather extreme? I would say a policy that necessitates permanent war abroad to spread these global values by force if necessary, and through government subversion and propaganda at home and abroad, if in the absence of direct conflict. Isn't that extreme as well? Isn't it rather surprising to find out that most of your culture that you consume and that has guided your opinions throughout your entire life was basically an advertisement from a corrupt elite who wanted to replace your perception of reality with beliefs that are coterminous with their own goals, i.e. the suicide of your nation and eventually you? I would say that's rather extreme as well. So the return to reality is most welcome. It's a return to sanity, it's a return to the natural order, and ultimately it's a return to the appetite for meaning in life. And meaning can't be supplied by these religions of man. Liberalism is basically a religion of man. It's an attempt to supplant Christ through Christianity. And as John Gray said in his 7 Types of Atheism, the liberal idea in the 20th century really did seek to continue Christianity absent Christ. And what that means is that it created a kind of homo liberalis in its place, an enlightened person that was best expressed probably in John Rawls' book, A Theory of Justice.
We call it homo economicus.
Well, no, homo liberalis, because it would, if you look at the liberal basis for justice in John Rawls' Theory of Justice, justice as fairness, he goes to this original position where he says you can only arrive at a universal theory of fairness, of justice, if you subtract all human attributes, your race, your age, your sex, culture, whether you're rich or poor, whether you're bright or stupid. And so you come to this condition of what Giorgio Agamben called bare life. You're basically just a kind of pulsating entity. And then you can say, oh, well, these pulsating entities without any human attributes, we can design rules that will treat them all equally. But of course, people aren't like that. And so that brings you back to the idea of equality and fairness in liberalism is basically the erasure of everything significant that defines us as who we are.
Yeah.
Right. Nietzsche called that guy the last man, too, by the way.
Well, Nietzsche's dead, isn't he, unlike God? So I wouldn't pay too much attention to
him. Yeah, I've been reading him a bunch for an upcoming episode, and I got to say, I'm not a really huge fan of the fella, to be honest.
It's good in your 20s.
Yeah. Yeah. He's like the world's first theater kid.
Right,
well,
guys.
Look. It's I've
got to go and watch some more BBC News.
Yeah, you got to go hear that commercial a few times. Yeah. All right, Frank, what would you like to promote to the peeps before we hit the road?
I don't understand the question.
What would you like to promote to the audience before we hit the road?
I don't understand. What I'm not really in the business of promoting things.
Oh, well, just why don't you give us some relevant contact / ways to find
me?
you.
What I do?
Yeah.
My advice to you is to stay off the internet as much as possible because it's dominated by loonies like myself. If you do read my Substack, may God have mercy on your soul, which you can find under my name, then I will advise you to do that in practically every post, because it's commonplace for people to suggest that their political enemies have been driven mad by the social patterning of their personalities on a constant wave of digital contradictions, but it will happen to you as well. So my advice to you is put down the phone, go outside, and try and make friends with real people before you're dead.
Agree.
Right.
But yeah, so I'll throw your Substack link in the description of the episode.
No,
as well.
don't. I make it all up. It's nonsense. I mean, look, the memes are good. Okay, the memes are good.
Yeah.
I was cheesed to read some of the articles.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad to say that it dispelled your disjudgment. Yeah. Oh, yeah. By the way, right, I am severely triggered by being called an optimist. Yeah. You know, it's basically I'll just say that reality is more legible when you haven't gone bonkers.
Yeah.
Agreed. And for us, www.historyhomos.com is the RSS feed. We're also available on iTunes, YouTube, BitChute, Odyssey, Rumble, Rockfin, and most importantly, our Substack page, historyhomospod.substack.com. If you like this episode, you get 100% more show just by subscribing to Substack. And by the way, we're not going to I know obviously William just said he's about to run out and go listen to more BBC ads, of course.
I'm going to do that right now. So I'll give you my sign off, which is going to be it's my NHS. Bye.
Okay. Later. But yeah, and so but please, if you like the show, check out historyhomospod.substack.com. You get 100% more show. We're not gonna just go, oh God, what are we gonna talk about this week? We literally just this week I put out a 2-hour long episode recounting the history of the life and death of Pat Tillman. I don't know if you're familiar with him, Frank, but he was something of a tragic figure for here we go, William's back.
If a man in a wig is invincible, it's illegal to laugh at a man in a wig. You're compelled by law to take him seriously.
You're right, actually. Well, I am in America so far, so
there's nothing more serious than a man in a wig. There's nothing more serious.
But yeah, so historyhomospod.substack.com. Check that out. 100% more show, 2 episodes a week, and yeah, you can also get this show from there too. So. Join us in our Telegram group, t.me/historyhomos chat. At time of recording, still the friendliest place on the internet. Follow us across social media at historyhomospod, and die with dignity. As William said, it's my NHS. So Frank, thank you one more time for joining us. Later, homos.
She's shining, she's the only one to see. She's shining, she's the only one for him. She's shining, she's the only song to sing. She's shining, she's the only one for him. She'll rising in the morning, I see the king sitting on the throne. He's sitting there, sitting